Is from John, the 12th chapter, verses 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Well, church, I absolutely love this story, and I love the song that Anita sang. I think we all have those life stories and those songs that really sow into our lives. And that is what this is for me this morning. And anytime I've preached this story, or really anytime I've heard it preached, it's always somewhat preached in a vacuum. I mean, this story is so rich with detail, you could do a 10-week sermon series on it and not run out of material. But I think because of that, we sometimes miss the broader context of the Gospel of John and how it sows into this story and in turn sows into our life. So I'm hoping that you will give me a little grace, and we're going to take about 2 or 3 minutes to just kind of give you some context, and then we're going to dive down into how that context connects with the narrative that Marlene just read to us. So the chapter, or the story that we just read came out of chapter 12 of the Gospel of John, and in chapter 11 we see the famous story of Lazarus being risen from the dead, and they actually reference that at the beginning of chapter 12. But I want to read that to you just real quick because I think it really highlights what's going on at this banquet. So I'm going to be reading out of the 11th chapter of John, verses 1 through 8. "Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, 'Lord, he whom you love is ill.' But when Jesus heard it, he said, 'This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so the Son of God may be glorified through it.' Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to his disciples, 'Let us go again to Judea.' The disciples said to him, 'Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you're going to go there again?'" So you need to see something here. For Jesus to go back and heal Lazarus, it was a very risky affair. In fact, his disciples said, "Hey, Jesus, do you remember, just a short time ago, the people there were going to stone you to death and you barely got away, and now you want to go back?" I mean, here's a good life lesson for you. If somebody wants to kill you somewhere, that's usually not the place that you should go. I mean, that's a free piece of advice outside of the sermon today. And we know that it was serious because listen to what Thomas said to him. John 11:16. Thomas, who was called the twin, also referred to as Doubting Thomas, said to his fellow disciples, "Let's also go that we may die with him." Doesn't sound too doubting there, does he? So they're like, "Jesus, you can't go back. They're going to stone you to death." And Jesus is like, "We're going." And Thomas is like, "Well, we might as well go with him because we can die with him." Great. This sounds like a fantastic plan, doesn't it? Could you imagine? I just tell First Church, "Hey, we're all going to go down here where everybody wants to kill us." Sure. Sounds wonderful. And then I want to jump ahead in the story just a little bit more. John 11:32 through 35. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. Can you imagine the sight? Mary, so desperate for Jesus to come before Lazarus had died. We've all been there. You pray for that miracle for your family member, and the prayers, for whatever reason, go unanswered. And Lazarus dies, and Jesus shows up a day too late, because on the fourth day, people were already considered dead. And she's lost. And she said, "Lord, I know you could have done something." And Jesus is looking at her heartbreak. He's looking at her disappointment. He's looking at the atmosphere. And the scripture says that he wept. He didn't shed a tear or two. It wasn't like a light little manly cry like you see in the movies. Jesus was weeping. He was sobbing. It was an uncontrolled flow of tears from his face. Do you see how much Jesus loved them? And it reminds us of how much Jesus loves us. But don't miss this. The only way for Lazarus to be risen from the grave would be for Jesus himself to lay down his life. Jesus knew by going to Bethany, it was the nail in his coffin. The people were waiting there to kill him. They were waiting to find him and track him down, and raising Lazarus from the dead was the thing that finally put this big plan in motion. Listen to John 11:47. So the chief priests and Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs." And they go on and they plot the death of Jesus. And if you're reading the Gospel of John as a whole, you'll see that the beginning of John is all about Jesus' ministry and signs and proving he's the Son of God. And then when you get to the Lazarus story, there's a pivot. And all of a sudden now it's preparing Jesus for his passion, his death, and his resurrection. That Lazarus story is right there, kind of separating Act 1 from Act 2. And Lazarus is a perfect illustration of the gospel. Jesus came knowing that he was going to lay his life down so that he could raise Lazarus' life up. It's the classic gospel narrative. He did it for Lazarus, he's going to do it for you, and he's going to do it for me. It's how it works. And so Mary, fast forward, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, they're having a dinner for Jesus. And the Bible doesn't tell us this, but I think it would be logical to assume that it may have been to celebrate bringing Lazarus back from the dead. I mean, it'd be hard to send. There's not very many Hallmark cards that say, "Thank you for bringing my relative back from the dead." They just don't exist. There's not a section for that. And so they're having this meal, and you can see the family is living out exactly kind of the pattern that they normally do. Lazarus is at the table with Jesus. Martha, as always, is serving. And Mary is where you always find Mary in John's gospel, at his feet. Did you notice even in the last passage I read, she fell at Jesus' feet. And in those times, if you were having a banquet, you would give everybody a little bit of perfume because people stunk. I mean, they didn't have running water. They didn't have deodorant. They smelled terribly. And I think sometimes we go, "Oh, well, they didn't care because they lived back then." But you know, when you smell something bad, your brain tells you it smells bad, right? And that's not something we just developed in the last 100 years or so. They knew they stunk. And so when you walked in, they'd give you a little bit of perfume and you'd put it on and it would kind of cover your stench. But they weren't going to give you perfume of pure nard. That was expensive stuff, and it was for a different purpose that we'll talk about later. So you can imagine, though, Jesus, he's sitting there at the table, and Mary goes over and she gets the really expensive perfume. And you can think Lazarus and Martha, they're probably thinking, "Oh, look, Mary's going to give Jesus a couple of drops of our very best." And that's probably good because he's worth it. He's worth a few drops of our best perfume. But that's not what Mary does. She takes the best perfume and she breaks the bottle. And it says that the scent filled the entire house. You knew that it was broken because the smell was so strong. and she dumped the perfume on Jesus' feet. And this story is in 3 of the Gospels, and in all 3 Gospels, the room goes crazy. But in John's Gospel, we get a little more detail. John always gives more detail. And there was one person who was particularly upset, and it was Judas. And he said, this oil could have been sold for 300 denarii, or about a year's worth of wages, and we could have given it to the poor. Doesn't Judas sound nice and holy? Why would you give that to Jesus when we could have given every bit of it to the poor? Judas was the church-going type. You know, he was even the church treasurer. And we know that Judas was so upset about this money being wasted, not because he cared for the poor, but because he helped himself to a little bit of what was in the communal purse. And truth be told, we look at Judas and we say, man, that was a bad guy. He stole out of the purse. But we all do. I do. Now, I'm not saying that I'm fleecing church finances. Don't hear me wrong here. But what I am saying is we all take something that belongs to God and we use it for our own purpose. I mean, the gospel tells us that we are bondservants of Christ, that we're to give our whole selves to Christ. All 300 denarii of ourselves are supposed to go to Jesus. And yet, if I'm honest, there are weeks when I'm way more focused on my own needs than I am looking for opportunities to serve our God. We all take a little bit of money out of the purse. And in all 3 Gospels, the people are upset. In all 3 Gospels, the people are yelling at Mary. And in all 3 Gospels, it's the same type of people. It's the religious people. And so on one hand, we have the religious folks who are mad that Mary would dare to take such an extravagant stance towards Jesus. And on the other hand, we have Mary laying at Jesus' feet, wiping them with her hair, worshiping him. And hear me, religion in and of itself isn't a good or a bad thing. And in fact, religion is a necessary part of any relationship. Let me give you an example. If I want to be friends with Marlene, you can't see her, but she's back here. If I want to be friends with Marlene, I'm going to have to be somewhat religious. If I say, Marlene, I'm going to meet you at noon for lunch, I may skip out on lunch 1 time, or even 2 times or 3 times. But after a while, if every time I tell Marlene I'm going to be somewhere, I'm not there, eventually it's going to affect our relationship. Religion would tell me, the rules of relationship would say, if I make plans with my friend Marlene, I should show up, right? If Aaron's my friend, I can't go talking bad about him behind his back. The rules of relationship would say, if he's my friend, if I have something to say to him, I should say it to his face. You can't have relationship without religion. I have a wife who I love very much, but I have to be somewhat religious. I can't have the same level of intimacy with someone else's wife as I have with my wife, or that relationship will not be healthy. But understand this, religion is only a foundation. Religion can't give you relationship. I could not cheat on my wife and still have a terrible relationship if I'm not sowing into her. And what happens sometimes is people focus so much on the religion, they forget to focus on the one who the religion is all about. Sure, religion is a necessary component of any relationship, but any relationship can't be simply defined by religion. That's not relational. And so we see all of these religious people, and they're mad at Mary because of her extravagant worship. They're saying, man, that Mary, she's a radical. And you shouldn't be radical about religion. In fact, that's the one thing you should never be radical about. I mean, I go to sporting events, and there are people that are painted head to toe with big foam things jumping up and down, and people look and go, oh yeah, that's normal. No problem. No offense, Eric. I'm going somewhere with this. Just let me get there. They could tell you every player on the team from 1940 until now. They're painted, they're jumping up and down, they're hooping and hollering, and we go, wow, That person's devoted. And yet somebody raises their hand during worship and we go, whoa, whoa. Look at that. They're lifting their hands up during worship. That is radical. What? That person reads their Bible every day? That's radical. You mean that person goes down and works with homeless people and every night does something for Jesus and doesn't take any time for themselves? That's radical. Now, you can be as radical as you want. You can watch every ball game that's on the TV and spend hours of your life doing that. Nobody will say anything. But you show that same dedication to Jesus and people are going to think you're strange. You want to become the best violinist, the best pianist, the best trumpet player, you name it, and you practice hours and hours every day. People don't see any issue with that. That's great. You're dedicated. But you do the same thing for Jesus, all of a sudden you're weird. You can pour hours and hours, unhealthy amounts of hours into your career, 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, and you're devoted. But you do the same thing for Jesus, and you're a radical. But brothers and sisters, if I'm going to be radical about anything, I sure hope it's Jesus. The whole room's in an uproar, and so we see this contrast between the religious folks and Mary. And understand this, the religious folks just want to keep things the way that it's always been. And they do what they always do to people like Mary. They rebuke her. What you're doing, Mary, is offensive. She took expensive oil, all that she had, and dumped it on the floor. Dumped it on the feet of Jesus. And in this culture, you don't mess with people's feet. In fact, there was a Jewish tradition that said, and it wasn't in the Bible, it was written later on, but it said that if you were a Jew and you had a Jewish servant, it was immoral for you to have that servant untie your shoes and mess with your feet. It was seen as such a disgrace. And here is Mary at the feet of Jesus pouring oil on his feet. And where do you pour oil if you're anointing somebody? You pour it on their head. You don't pour it on their feet. And that shows what kind of king Jesus is going to be, and that's a sermon for another day. But recognize it would have been very offensive for her to have poured oil on his feet. And then she let her hair down. And that's a huge disgrace in that culture. The only place that a woman would ever let her hair down is in front of her husband. It would be the equivalent of somebody standing up in front of the church and just starting to unbutton their blouse. We'd be like, what? Now, there's nothing sexual to it, but it would have been that level of shock and offense. So here's Mary dumping the oil, which, by the way, was their life savings. They didn't have Social Security. They didn't have retirement accounts. This was something that was supposed to be saved for an emergency. And she's dumping it on Jesus' feet. She's wiping his feet with her hair. And the religious people are going, you have lost it. You have taken it too far. And when people like Mary enter the church, religious people want to run them off. Like Judas and the rest, religious people yell at them. Don't you dare mess with how we always do things around here. And can I be honest with you? Anytime in any church I've been in, including this one, that we've done something that's gospel-centered, I have had someone in my office complaining about it. Every single time. Don't mess with it. Why are you doing that? Why are we wasting money on that? And they miss the point. They totally miss the point. Because religion is consumed about the culture's standards. You see, when Mary grabbed that oil, she knew what the people were going to think. She knew they were going to be mad. But she grabbed the oil anyway and poured it out because she didn't care about what they thought. She only cared about one thing, what Jesus thinks. But religion, it's consumed with trying to live into cultural standards. It's consumed with trying to be relevant. It's consumed with trying to look the right way. But what it's not concerned about or consumed with is trying to pour itself out onto Jesus. It's never concerned with that. And no matter what we do, religion cannot produce what we see in this passage. No matter how well the choir sings every week, no matter how well I preach, no matter how good our call to worship is, no matter how well our liturgist liturgizes, no matter how well we do mission and ministry, it can't produce what we see in this passage. What Mary's doing can't come from traditional worship or contemporary worship. It can't come from something that we just do once a week at church. What Mary's doing can only come as a result of a heart that's overflowing with a deep love for God. It comes from a heart that's overflowing with gratitude for all that God has done for her. And when I go to ministry trainings and when I go to conference trainings and I feel like I'm at a marketing seminar, I have to wonder, have we lost sight of true worship? Have we started to think that worship is singing Song 248 and 392 and then shaking each other's hands and going on out? That's not worship. It's not worship. Worship is when we connect to the heart of God. And out of connecting to God's heart, God's love flows out of us and onto the world around us. Worship is an action. We can praise God through song, but we can't worship Him unless our heart is in the right place. What Mary's doing doesn't come from a process or a model of ministry. It comes from her connection to God. And so you have to think, Mary, she's sitting at the table, and she's looking at her dead brother, who's now alive. She's looking at all of her hopes and dreams that were once dashed. When she was praying that prayer and felt so disappointed, she's now seeing in real time what the resurrection means. And I told you earlier that that jar of oil, that was their retirement account. That was to be used in an emergency. And when the male in your family dies, that would have been the perfect time to sell the oil. And that probably would have been a discussion that her and Martha had had. They laid Lazarus in the tomb and they said, you know what, we're in a lot of trouble. We better think about selling that oil and getting some resources together. And now here's Lazarus in the flesh, alive, good as new. Could they do any less than take that oil and dump it on the feet of Jesus? And let me tell you, outside of Christ, all of us are as good as dead. Oh, sure, maybe not physically dead until we get older. But we can never experience the trueness of life that God has for us without Him. Mary pours her full self out onto Jesus because Jesus first poured His full self out onto her. And I know that most likely none of us have stood by the casket of a loved one and had Jesus just walk down the aisle and go, so-and-so, come forth, and have them get up and walk out of the church. And if you have, really let me know, because that'd be a good story to highlight sometime. But every funeral that I officiate, if you come to a funeral and I'm speaking at it, you will hear this verse. And it comes right before Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And it's when Mary said, when Martha said, Jesus, I know you could have helped him. I know you could have helped him. And Jesus says this back to her in John 11:25 and 26. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? I'm going to read this again, and I want you to ask yourself this question. Do I believe this? Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in Him, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in Him will never die. Do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? And if the answer is yes, then how can we show any less devotion than Mary has in this passage? If we really believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, how can we not every day pour our entire selves out on His feet? How can we do any less than give him our most valuable thing every day? As we think about our lives and the dead places in our lives and how Jesus can come in and raise them to new life, how can we not pour the oil? Because we don't need it anymore. He's already provided for all that we could ever need. For those of us who have stood around a casket and wept over a loved one who has preceded us in death, when we think about these words, I am the resurrection and the life, and we think about those who have gone on before us, and the new life that they have in Jesus, and the fact that many of them, they may have been very sick, or they may have been very ill, and all of a sudden they're restored to a newness of life, or maybe they weren't, and we still know that regardless of how we are, that when we die, we don't go to a worse place, but rather we're made complete in the God who created us. And when we think about that, how can we not pour the oil of our lives down at his feet? And for those of you who will one day die, I know I will. For those of you who will one day die and you're looking forward to that future glory, you're looking forward to resurrection, to life abundant, how can we not pour the oil of our lives down at his feet? The Apostle Paul says it like this in the 12th chapter of Romans. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do you hear that? Mary, she was down at Jesus' feet, giving her all, worshiping him with her all. And Paul says, this is how you do it. And it's the same thing that Mary did. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. This is worship. And then he tells you how to do it in verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That means every day changing the thoughts of your mind to reflect Christ more and more, so that you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I so often will have people come in my office and say, Josh, I have no clue what God's will is for my life. Now, I'm not saying that I always know the exact will of God. In fact, that's usually a discernment process for all of us. But if you are a Christian, you should know in general the will and the direction that God has for your life. Jesus said, my lambs know my voice. I'm going to tell you where to go. Here's Paul, he's saying, as you renew your mind through the power of the Spirit, you'll know God's will. As you worship God in spirit and in truth, you'll know the direction that God wants your life to go. And if we say, I have no clue, then it may be time for us to start the road of authentic discipleship. It's an invitation, not a condemnation. The Apostle Paul tells us how to pour our life out on the feet of Jesus, how to worship him. And it's through living our lives as a living sacrifice, through dying so that we can live. And anything less than that is just religion. You can come here every week. You can go through the motions, and if you're not letting your hair down, which I know is kind of ironic for me, and washing Jesus' feet with the oil of your life, you're wasting your time. I know that's not good for church attendance, but you are. If you're simply coming here every week and singing some songs and going through the motions, you're wasting your time. And it's this lie that the religious institutions in America have been feeding us for 70 plus years, that if you just show up to the banquet, if you just attend church and give your money, then that's enough and God's happy with you. And by attend, we just mean like once a quarter or whenever it's convenient. We just appreciate you being here. And that's not the gospel. That's just religion. It's not enough. It's not going to help you experience the life-saving grace that Christ has for you every day. You have to do more than just go through the motions. You have to lay your whole life down at his feet. I think Isaac Watts said it so well in his great hymn, "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross." And he said this, "Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all." In other words, you could have every possession in the world. You could have the wealth of all the richest people in our society combined and lay it down at the cross of Christ, and it still wouldn't be enough. But thank God for his grace, that as we offer him as much as we can offer him in a given day, his grace makes up the difference. And we can live into the deep love that Christ has for us and show that deep love to our families and to our community and to our world. Pour yourself out on Jesus today because he is worthy of all your worship. May it be true in your life and in mine. Amen.